96% of you are not subscribed to the channel. When I reach 1,000 subscribers, I will share a series of exclusive stories. Subscribe now. The stars stretched endlessly in every direction, a silent and cold witness to the chaos unfolding in the galaxy. From where I stood, staring out from the observation deck of the Renegade, they seemed indifferent to the struggles of the living beings caught beneath their gaze. I'm Jonathan Ryder, a military strategist, and today, like most days, I was trying to make sense of the mess we'd found ourselves in. The Galactic Imperium, an empire that had crushed and ruled countless systems, was tightening its grip on the galaxy. And here I was, standing on the deck of a ship, at the head of a resistance that was barely hanging on. Behind me, the quiet hum of the ship's machinery was broken by the sound of footsteps. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. Her presence was unmistakable, like the calm before a storm. Lyra, the daughter of the Galactic Imperium's ruler, had been on board for less than a day, but it already felt like she had been a part of this resistance forever. John, her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it, like a blade concealed in silk. I turned, meeting her gaze. Lyra's silver eyes were sharp, calculating. She had the same regal bearing as her father, but there was something different about her, something more human. She was as much a prisoner of the Imperium as we were, though her chains were invisible, forged from duty and expectation. Lyra, I nodded. What's the verdict? Do we have a plan? She leaned against the bulkhead, crossing her arms, her raven-black hair framing her face. I've gone over your tactical reports. The Imperium's forces are vast, but they're stretched thin. They control too much territory, and that's their weakness. I nodded, having suspected the same. The Imperium's strength was its size, but it was also its greatest vulnerability. Lyra's decision to defect had opened a door, one I wasn't sure I was ready to walk through. But there was no denying her knowledge of the Imperium's inner workings could change everything. You're not telling me everything, I said quietly, my eyes locking onto hers. She was hiding something. I could feel it in the way she tensed, the way her eyes flickered with a hesitation she usually kept buried deep. She took a deep breath, and for the first time, I saw vulnerability break through her calm facade. My father, she paused, her voice barely above a whisper. He won't stop. He'll burn every world that opposes him. He's obsessed with power, and the longer we wait, the more ruthless he becomes. I stepped closer, my eyes narrowing. Why now, Lyra? Why betray him now, after all these years? Her gaze hardened again, and she straightened, her vulnerability slipping back behind the mask she wore so well. Because I've seen what happens to those who defy him. I've seen what he's willing to do to maintain control. I won't be a part of it anymore. This isn't just about rebellion, John. It's about survival. If we don't act, the Imperium will crush everything in its path, including us. There it was, the truth. She wasn't just here because of some moral epiphany. She was fighting for her life, just like the rest of us. You have a plan, I said, stepping back, watching as she unfolded her strategy in her mind. Lyra nodded. There's a planet on the far edge of the Andromeda sector, a remote world that's been forgotten by the Imperium. It was once a stronghold of the Resistance, but they've driven most of us underground. The people there are hardened, they're desperate, but they're fighters. If we can unite them with the Resistance, we'll have a chance. A spark of hope flickered inside me, but I kept it buried deep. I'd learned the hard way that hope could be as dangerous as despair. What do you need from me? I asked, my voice steady. Lyra glanced out the viewport, her expression distant. I need you to trust me. I need you to lead this mission, to bring these people together. They won't follow me, not yet. They'll follow you. I studied her face for a moment. Lyra had always been enigmatic, a puzzle I hadn't yet solved. But in that moment, I realized something. Lyra wasn't just trying to save herself. She was trying to save the galaxy from her father, from the monster he had become. All right, I said, my voice firm. We'll go to this planet. We'll gather these people. But if this is a trap, Lyra, I swear. She cut me off, her eyes flashing with something between anger and pain. I didn't risk my life to betray you, John. I'm on your side. Believe that, or this is already lost. For a moment, Neither of us said anything. The tension between us was electric, like the calm before a storm. Then I nodded. "Let's do it," I said. The planet Lyra had mentioned, Izura, was as desolate as they came. We dropped out of hyperspace just beyond its orbit, the swirling blue clouds of its atmosphere hiding the chaos below. The Imperium had ravaged this world, and from what I could see on the tactical screens, it hadn't yet recovered. "Landing trajectory set," the navigator called. His voice a welcome distraction from the gnawing sense of dread building in my gut. Lyra stood beside me, her arms crossed as she stared at the planet below. Her expression was unreadable, but I could feel the tension radiating from her. She knew what was at stake here. We all did. "We'll land outside the main city," she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "There's a contact waiting for us, an old friend of mine. He can lead us to the resistance." I glanced at her. "And you trust him?" She met my gaze, unflinching. "With my life." I didn't have the luxury of trust. Not anymore. But I didn't have a choice, either. If we were going to have any hope of bringing the resistance together, I needed to rely on her, even if it killed us both. The landing was rough, the ship shaking violently as it cut through the atmosphere. But as we touched down in a barren, rocky field, the crew began prepping for the mission ahead. I stood at the exit ramp, my pulse quickening as I glanced out at the harsh landscape. This was it. We were walking into the lion's den, and there was no turning back. "Ready?" Lyra asked, her eyes sharp as she adjusted the blaster at her hip. I nodded, gripping my own weapon tightly. "Let's get this done." As we stepped out into the cold, barren air of Izura, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for us, something dark and dangerous, lurking just beyond the horizon. But then again, in this galaxy, danger was never far behind. Sorry to interrupt the story, but if you haven't subscribed yet, please take a second to subscribe to the channel. We stepped out into the barren landscape of Izura, the wind whipping around us, carrying with it the scent of dust and decay. The world felt desolate, forgotten. I couldn't help but wonder if this place was as hopeless as it looked, or if Lyra's contact would really be the key to reigniting the fight against the Imperium. Lyra moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the horizon, every step filled with a quiet determination. I kept close to her, my senses on high alert. There was something about this place that set my nerves on edge. The silence was too heavy, too unnatural. We were supposed to meet her contact, someone she trusted from her days within the Imperium's inner circle. Someone who had, according to Lyra, secretly harbored anti-Imperium sentiments for years. I wanted to believe her, but after years of dealing with spies, turncoats, and double agents, trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. The coordinates Lyra had given us led us to a narrow gorge, hidden between jagged cliffs. It was the perfect spot for an ambush, and my gut churned at the thought. Still, I had to give her the benefit of the doubt. For now. She had risked everything to join us, and that counted for something. "There," Lyra said, pointing ahead. A small outpost, barely noticeable against the rocky backdrop, came into view. It looked abandoned, but a single light flickered from within, a signal that someone was inside. "This is it," she said, her voice steady, though I caught a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. We made our way toward the outpost, the silence around us growing more oppressive with every step. I tightened my grip on my blaster, my instincts screaming that something wasn't right. "John," Lyra said quietly, slowing her pace as we neared the entrance. "Let me go in first. He'll trust me more if I'm alone." I studied her face, searching for any sign that she was holding something back. But Lyra's expression was unreadable, calm and composed, as always. "All right," I said finally, though the unease gnawed at me. "But stay in contact. If anything feels off, you get out." "Got it." She nodded, giving me a faint smile. "I'll be fine." I watched as she approached the outpost, her figure disappearing into the shadows of the doorway. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one heavier than the last. The air felt thick with tension, and my hand hovered over my blaster, ready for anything. Then, a crackle came through my comm unit. "John," Lyra's voice came through, but there was something wrong. Her tone was tight, filled with an edge of panic I hadn't heard before. "It's a trap. He's working for my father." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I cursed under my breath, motioning to the rest of the squad to fall back and take cover behind the rocks. My heart raced, not just with the sudden danger, but with a surge of anger. How could I have let this happen? How could she? Lyra, get out of there. I barked into the calm, my eyes scanning the cliffs for any sign of movement. I can't, her voice came through, strained now. They're here, John. Imperium soldiers. He's leading them straight to you. I didn't know. I wanted to believe her. Hell, I needed to believe her. But right now, we were neck-deep in an ambush, and the timing couldn't have been worse. The tension between trusting her and assuming the worst gnawed at me like a blade twisting in my gut. A sound, faint at first, reached my ears, boots, moving across rock. I swiveled, my blaster already in hand as I caught the gleam of armor on the ridgeline above us. Imperium forces, just like Lyra had said, and they were closing in. We're surrounded, I muttered to myself, my mind racing through options. None of them were good. Damn it! Fall back! I yelled to the team. Get to higher ground now. Blaster fire erupted from the cliffs, red-hot beams scorching the air as we ducked behind cover. The rocks provided some protection, but we wouldn't last long if we didn't move. As the squad scattered, moving to reposition, I kept my focus on the outpost. Lyra was still in there. She had warned us, yes, but the question still lingered in my mind. Had she known this was coming all along? Was this all part of her plan? My mind swirled with doubt, but I couldn't let it paralyze me now. Lyra, I shouted into the calm, where are you? I'm coming out, she said, her voice breathless, filled with urgency. Just hold them off until I can. Her voice cut off with a sharp static hiss, and my blood ran cold. Lyra, no response. I swore under my breath. I didn't have time to think. I had to act. I motioned to one of the squad leaders, signaling them to cover me. I'm going in. Keep those soldiers off us. Without waiting for a reply, I sprinted toward the outpost, weaving between the rocks as blaster fire zipped past me. My heart thundered in my chest, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. There was no room for hesitation, no room for doubt. I reached the entrance and barreled inside, my blaster raised, ready for anything. The interior was dark, the only light coming from a flickering console in the corner. Lyra stood near the center of the room, her back against the wall, her expression a mixture of frustration and desperation. They're coming, she said, her voice strained. I tried to stop him, John. I swear. I held up a hand, silencing her. Save it. We don't have time for explanations. Her eyes flashed with something between anger and guilt, but she nodded, pushing herself off the wall. We have to move. Now. I didn't argue. I could deal with her later, if we survived this. For now, we had one objective: escape. We burst out of the outpost together, dodging blaster fire as we made a break for the ridge where the rest of the squad was holding off the Imperium forces. The terrain was rough, but we moved quickly, our breath coming in ragged gasps. As we reached the others, I glanced at Lyra, my mind still churning with questions. Could I still trust her? Was this all part of some deeper plan? I didn't know. But right now, I needed her. For better or worse, Lyra had chosen this fight. And for better or worse, I had chosen to trust her. But that trust had limits, and if she crossed the line again, there would be no turning back. We managed to retreat to higher ground, the Imperium soldiers finally backing off after an intense firefight. But as the smoke cleared, the bitter taste of betrayal still lingered. We were alive, but barely. Lyra sat beside me, her breathing steady but her eyes distant. The silence between us was heavy, thick with unspoken accusations and broken trust. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but the exhaustion gnawing at me held my tongue. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet, barely above a whisper. I didn't know he was working for my father. I swear to you, John, I thought he was on our side. I looked at her, my jaw clenched. You trusted him. You brought us here. And now we're lucky to be alive. Her eyes met mine, filled with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe. Or regret. I made a mistake. But you have to believe me. I didn't want this. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure if I could believe her. But deep down, I knew one thing. She was right about one thing. If we didn't work together, if I couldn't trust her, even a little, then we were finished. We'll deal with this later, I said finally, my voice hard. Right now, we need to figure out what's next. Lyra nodded, the tension between us still thick, but for now, we both knew what mattered most: survival. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And despite everything, Lyra was still standing by my side. For now. The cold, metallic air inside the command bunker clung to my skin as I stared at the holographic map of Asira, the shifting lines of battle illuminating the darkened room. We were surrounded, boxed in by the Imperium's forces. Every escape route was narrowing, and it felt like we were running out of time. My mind raced through every possible scenario, but no matter how hard I tried, the odds were stacked against us. I glanced at Lyra, standing across the room, her violet eyes focused on the same map. She was calm, steady, like she always was when things got bad. Her presence had become a source of quiet strength for me in ways I hadn't fully realized until recently. But there was something more now. Something between us that neither of us could deny any longer. The past few weeks had changed everything. It had started during that last mission. We were deep behind enemy lines, trying to sabotage an Imperium weapons depot when things went sideways. The explosions, the blaster fire, the chaos of it all. It was the closest we'd come to death, and in those moments, everything we'd been holding back broke loose. I remembered the heat of her skin against mine, the desperation in our kiss as we clung to each other, believing it might be our last moment alive. When we made it out, when the dust settled and the adrenaline faded, neither of us could pretend anymore. That night, back at the base, we didn't even talk about it. We didn't need to. The look in her eyes said everything. But now, standing here, staring at the Imperium's ever-tightening grip, I realized just how much more complicated our lives had become. I walked over to her, needing to feel that connection again, if only for a moment. "We'll find a way out of this," I said softly, though even I wasn't sure how. She nodded, her expression unreadable, but I could see the tension in the set of her jaw. "I know," she whispered. "We always do." But there was something different in her voice, something she wasn't saying. I could feel the weight of it hanging between us, but before I could press her further, the door to the bunker hissed open, and one of the squad leaders stepped inside. "Captain Ryder," the soldier said, his face lined with fatigue. "We've confirmed movement on the North Ridge. Imperium scouts. They'll have our position within the hour." I cursed under my breath. "Pull everyone back. We need to regroup and get ready to move. We can't stay here." The soldier nodded and disappeared back through the door, leaving me alone with Lyra again. I turned back to her, about to speak, when she suddenly reached out and grabbed my arm. "John, wait." The urgency in her voice stopped me cold. "What is it?" I asked, searching her face. Her hand tightened around my arm, and she looked away for a moment, as if gathering the strength to say whatever was on her mind. Finally, she met my gaze, her expression conflicted. "John, there's something I need to tell you." I frowned, stepping closer. "What is it? What's wrong?" She hesitated, her eyes searching mine, and then the words came, quiet but clear. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, everything in me froze. The weight of those two words hit me harder than any blaster shot ever could. My mind spun, trying to process what she had just said, but it was like I couldn't quite wrap my head around it. "Pregnant. Lyra. And me. Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She nodded, her gaze steady but filled with a mixture of fear and vulnerability I had never seen in her before. "I've known for a few days. I was going to tell you, but with everything happening, I felt like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. A baby. In the middle of this war. The timing couldn't have been worse. But despite the chaos swirling around us, all I could feel in that moment was a strange, unexpected sense of hope. Amid all the darkness, all the death, this was life. Something good, something real. I took her hands in mine, pulling her closer. Lyra, this is... I don't know what to say. But the words stuck in my throat. How could I tell her what I was really feeling? That I was scared. That I had no idea how we were supposed to survive, much less bring a child into this galaxy that was tearing itself apart. I know, she said softly, reading the conflict in my eyes. This changes everything, doesn't it? Yeah, I breathed. It does. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight, letting the weight of the world fall away, if only for a moment. But as much as I wanted to stay in that bubble of silence, reality pressed in on us from all sides. We were still at war, and now I had more to protect than ever before. We pulled apart, and I could see the same thoughts flickering in her mind. There wasn't time to dwell on the what-ifs. We needed to survive first. We'll get through this, I promised, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince, her or myself. You and the baby. I'll keep you safe, no matter what. She gave me a small, sad smile. I'm not going to sit back and hide while you fight this war, John. I know, I said, my heart heavy with the knowledge that she wouldn't. She was a fighter, through and through. But this was different now. It wasn't just about us anymore. But you're not just fighting for the rebellion now. You're fighting for more than that. Her gaze softened, and she nodded, but I could see the stubborn resolve still burning behind her eyes. Lyra wouldn't back down. Not from me, not from anyone. We'll figure it out, she said. Together. As the weight of our situation settled back in, the sound of blaster fire echoed in the distance. The Imperium forces were closing in, and our time was running out. Come on, I said, grabbing my blaster. We need to move. We exited the bunker, the cold night air biting at my skin. The squad was already mobilizing, readying for the retreat. But my focus was sharper now, my resolve deeper. I wasn't just fighting for the rebellion anymore. I was fighting for Lyra, for our child, for the future. And no matter what came next, I wouldn't let them take that away from us. The cold night sky stretched above us as we moved quickly through the rocky terrain, leaving the bunker behind. The Imperium forces were closing in, and every second mattered. My mind raced, not just with tactical thoughts, but with the weight of what Lyra had told me. She was pregnant. We were having a child. As we pushed through the narrow pass that led to the base of the mountains, my eyes darted to Lyra, who moved with the same grace and determination as ever, but now I saw her differently. She wasn't just a fellow soldier, or even my partner in this impossible war. She was carrying our future. "Captain, they're on us," one of the squad leaders shouted, his voice cutting through my thoughts. I looked over my shoulder and saw the shadows of Imperium soldiers closing in. We were outnumbered, as always. But this time, there was no running, no retreat. We had to fight. "Take positions," I ordered, my voice stronger than I felt. "Hold them off as long as you can. We need to buy time for the rest of the resistance to regroup." Blaster fire erupted as the first wave of Imperium forces came down the ridge. The night lit up with flashes of red and blue as our squad returned fire, the crackle of energy filling the air. I ducked behind a boulder, my heart pounding in my chest. Lyra crouched beside me, her breathing steady despite the chaos around us. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment, I knew she understood the stakes as well as I did. This was it. Our last stand. "I'm with you," she said, her voice firm, but there was a tenderness in it too, something unspoken but deeply understood between us. "Always," I replied, gripping her hand briefly before we both turned our attention back to the battle. The Imperium soldiers advanced, their heavy armor gleaming under the faint moonlight. Our squad fought fiercely, but the enemy was relentless, closing in inch by inch. The ground shook with the force of explosions as artillery fire rained down from the cliffs above. We were pinned, our options narrowing by the second. But we couldn't surrender. Not now. Not after everything we'd fought for. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the ridge, sending dust and debris into the air. I looked up, heart racing, and saw a line of Imperium soldiers fall back. For a moment, I thought we'd been hit by our own artillery, but then I saw it, reinforcements. Resistance forces had arrived, flanking the Imperium from the west. A slim chance, but a chance nonetheless. Jonathan! Lyra shouted over the noise, pulling my attention back to her. We can push them back. If we hold the line, we can break through. I nodded, adrenaline surging through me. Let's end this. We rallied the squad, moving forward with renewed energy. Blaster fire filled the air as we charged the Imperium forces, the momentum of the battle shifting. The reinforcements had given us the opening we needed. The fight was brutal, chaotic, but inch by inch, we forced them back. The Imperium soldiers fell one by one, and as the smoke cleared, I realized we had done it. The immediate threat had passed. I stood in the middle of the battlefield, breathing heavily, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief. Lyra was beside me, her face smudged with dirt but her eyes shining with that fierce, determined light I had come to love. "It's over," I said, my voice hoarse. "For now," she replied, but there was a softness in her tone, a hint of hope. We had won this battle, but the war wasn't over. The Imperium was still out there, still a looming shadow over everything. But as I looked at Lyra, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. We had survived. And with her by my side, I knew we could face whatever the future held. As the resistance forces began to regroup, preparing for the next phase of the fight, I turned to Lyra, reaching out to take her hand. There was so much uncertainty, so much left to do, but at that moment, none of it mattered. "Lyra," I said softly, pulling her closer, "whatever happens next, we'll get through it. You, me, and the baby," she finished, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. I nodded, my heart swelling with a strange mix of pride and fear. This war had taken so much from us, our homes, our families, our peace. But it had also given us something precious. A future. A reason to keep fighting. "We'll give our child a better world," I promised, my voice firm. "We'll make sure of it." Lyra rested her head against my shoulder, her body leaning into mine as we stood together in the quiet aftermath of the battle. "I believe you," she whispered. And in that moment, so did I. We would keep fighting, not just for ourselves, but for the life growing inside her. For the future we wanted to build. Together. As the stars blinked above us, silent witnesses to everything we had endured, I felt the weight of the war lift, if only for a moment. We had found love in the midst of chaos, and that love would carry us through whatever came next. No matter how dark the galaxy seemed, we had a light to guide us now. And we wouldn't stop until we had one. For Lyra, for our child, for the future. The war would rage on, but we had something worth fighting for, something that made every battle, every sacrifice, worthwhile. And as long as we had each other, I knew we would survive. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this story, please like it and subscribe to our channel for more content like this.